Welcome to this CGTN live broadcast. My name's Martin Lowe. We're in Thailand. We're out at sea. Hopefully you can see our pictures clearly and you can hear the sound. But we are out at sea. We're with the Salvage team and we're with the Royal Thai Police who are hopeful, more hopeful than they have been at any time before, that very shortly we will be able to see the raising of a Thai tour boat which sank here in a fierce storm and 12 days ago, and in that tragedy 47 Chinese holidaymakers lost their lives. That was children and mums and dads, family members and friends. They'd come here from China to Thailand on a holiday, and as part of that holiday they took a day trip on a boat called the Phoenix. And that was a trip to an island, a small island beach off the main coast, Phuket, which is itself an island, for a day's sunbathing and a day's swimming and a day's snorkeling. And for the first half of the day, everything went perfectly. The weather was fine and people had a wonderful time. But as they were coming back, actually at about this time of the day, suddenly the weather changed and a fierce storm erupted. Waves were said to be as high as 5 meters. The ship on which they were travelling, the Phoenix, 101 people were on board, and it was quite a large vessel. It was about 30 meters long, a big, but even so it was overcome by the size of the waves. It capsized and it sank to the bottom of the sea. In that tragedy, 47 Chinese holidaymakers lost their lives. Now, this is the worst sea accident here in Thailand in memory. And clearly, number one is sympathy to those who lost their lives and to their families, relatives, and to the many, many more who were ill. But number two, of course, is to find out how such a terrible thing could have happened. And right from the beginning, what was seen as central to that investigation was to raise the wreck of the Phoenix to the bottom of the sea. Now, this operation which we're looking at today, we're hopeful that we will see the boat actually brought back above the surface of the water for the first time in more than 2 months. What you're looking at is a specialist salvage vessel, a crane ship which has been brought here from a major port here in Southeast Asia, in Singapore. For 3 months there were operations to try to refloat Phoenix. Teams of divers were down every day and they were attaching balloons and drums to the Phoenix on the seabed, and they were filling them with air, and it was always hoped that the boat could be floated back to the surface, and then once it was back to the surface it could be taken into Phuket, back to the main island of Phuket, taken to a shipyard where a detailed forensic examination could take place of the boat. Clearly there are lots of questions that need to be answered. Was the boat fully seaworthy? Were the crew competent on that day? And was the life-saving equipment which was on board effective and of a good enough standard? But it's been a really difficult task. Number one in terms of difficulty is that the water here is quite deep comparatively. The Phoenix has been lying in 45 meters. That's more than 150, 160 feet of water, and that is very deep for divers to operate. Up to about 25 meters, divers can go up and down fairly easily, but once you start getting to depths such as 45 meters, it becomes a very, very specialist task indeed. Only a limited number of divers are able to do that, and even those specialist divers can only dive for short periods of time. And in fact, during the 2 to 3 months that the original Thai salvage company tried to raise this boat, one of those divers actually lost his life. One of those divers who had been involved in this recovery operation right from day one. In fact, the man who very first found the wreck of the Phoenix after it sank on July the 5th, after it disappeared from view. Some survivors were pulled from the water, of course. Many of those later found to have died were simply missing, and there was a frantic operation to find the boat and see if perhaps there was an air pocket, perhaps there were survivors. A Thai man called Nipat Kladnak, he was the Thai diver who actually found the boat, and perhaps because of that he remained with the operation throughout. He was involved in looking for survivors. When it became clear that there were no more survivors, he was involved in recovering the bodies of the dead, and even after that he was involved in scouring the inside of the boat on the seabed and also the seafloor around it to retrieve personal possessions, mobile phones, jewellery, even money, passports. All of those were brought to the surface, and then the extended operation to try to refloat the Phoenix, which was ultimately unsuccessful. But during that operation, at some point he went into the sea and lost his life. What we're hoping will happen today is that now, with this much larger vessel here in place, and this crane, we understand, can lift a weight of more than 1,000 tons, so that should be more than ample to bring the Phoenix up from the bed. Now, we've all been here a few times before. This is to be an operation far more difficult than people originally anticipated, and a number of have been made to raise the boat. But now, this afternoon, we are assured that the salvage team is 100%, or I shouldn't say that, because when you're out at sea and when you're dealing with underwater currents and various different difficulties, there are no guarantees. But more than ever, they're hopeful that today will be the day that the boat actually comes above the surface of the water. What I can tell you is that on the other end of that crane that you're looking at, and the metal the metal chains and hawsers and ropes that are going down into the sea, they are already attached to the Phoenix boat, and the Phoenix has already been raised from the seabed just a short distance, we think 1 meter. But clearly when a boat is on the bottom of the sea, it doesn't just sit there flat on the sea bottom. As the wind and the tide moves the sand and the underground debris, the boat became half submerged in sand and debris. That has been cleared away now by teams of divers who've been working here for the past 3 or 4 days. Excuse me. And already we are told, as an initial stage of this recovery operation, the Phoenix has already been lifted at 1 meter from the bottom of the sea. So it is now hanging free, we believe, underwater, still 74 meters underwater. The plan is that if the boat remains stable, and if it doesn't get knocked around too much by currents, and if the ropes and the tethers which are attached to it appear to be holding fast, then an attempt will be made to start the motors on the large crane and bring the Phoenix quickly to the surface of the sea. It started to rain here. That shouldn't make any difference. It might interfere with our signals, but of course it won't make any difference to the recovery operation. And what we're looking at can be deceptive. Clearly the sea is totally flat, and that would make us all suppose that conditions are fairly calm. But what we're told here is that actually underwater there are very strong sea currents in this area, and that's because we're in the Andaman Sea. We're a short distance off the coast of the holiday island of Phuket. Phuket is the biggest island in Thailand, but it is surrounded by a number of smaller islands, and as the sea makes its way around those smaller islands, that often causes different currents to collide. So we're looking at a fairly calm above water situation, despite the fact that it's raining, but under the water cold conditions are more difficult than they seem. But notwithstanding that, everybody is very hopeful. Today will be the day that we see the boat come to the surface. What you can see at the moment is a ship from the Thai Coast Guard. Even though this is a specialist crane accompanied by a barge, and it has a huge capability to lift weight, if simply sitting there as a floating crane, and it tried to lift something 5 meters below it. Of course, there is a risk that even the crane itself could capsize or simply move. So under the water again, we can't see it, but this crane has 8 different anchors laid out all around it. Long steel chains ending in anchors which have sunk into the seabed, 4 on each side, 8 all the way around, encircling the crane, ship and the platform to keep them stable. That's why we can't really go any closer, because if our vessel was to move in any closer and to perhaps collide with any of those chains which are attached to any of those 8 anchors, we could cause a huge problem for them, because it could cause the anchor to dislodge, which would in turn possibly make the actual crane ship itself unstable. So we're standing off a short distance, and some of the smaller vessels that you can see around here are basically patrolling what has been declared an exclusion zone of around about a kilometre all around the ship. But actually we're on an official Thai police vessel, so we're here under the control of the Thai authorities. So we're assured that we're not in any way hampering or interfering with the operation that's taking place. But as I say, steps are being taken to ensure the safety of all those on board. We're not really getting any continual updates of progress. So basically you're seeing, I'm seeing, we're waiting for some sort of movement on the vessel, some sort of action. Hopefully, ideally, we're waiting for those chains to start moving, which would signal that they're attempting to bring the Phoenix to the surface. Now, we know that it's essential to the police investigation into this awful tragedy that the Phoenix is raised. Already doubts have been raised about the seaworthiness of the vessel. There have been various police officers and marine officials who have made statements already in the preceding few weeks and months, saying that their initial paper trail investigations, if you like, have raised a number of serious question marks about the vessel. It's suggested that it was constructed at a shipyard that didn't have the correct licenses to build seagoing vessels, and it's also suggested that it was fitted not with a special marine engine, a ship engine, but in fact an engine which had been designed for use in a truck or a lorry on the land, and because of that there are doubts about the effectiveness of the exhaust system which was fitted to that particular engine, and it is thought that possibly, and we can see some movement now, we can see possibly some movement on those ropes. Hopefully we're going to see the boat being raised soon, but we were saying, yes, that because the exhausts had not been specifically designed for use in a boat at sea, as the storm whipped up on July the 5th and those very high 5-meter waves started to hit the boat and cause it to roll, one theory is that the engine exhausts, which should obviously have been clear of the water to allow the exhaust gases from the engine to escape into the air, they may have been too low down and they may have quickly been engulfed by water, which would have caused the engine to stop, and which then would have given the Phoenix boat no power to drive itself out of the bad weather and the rough sea in which it found itself, and left it really at the mercy of the wind and the waves. And we know what happened. The boat initially capsized, and then it seems very, very quickly slid backwards into the sea and sank stern first. When it did that, another awful part of this tragedy unfolded, perhaps quite rightly, everybody on board seemed to have been wearing life jackets. But the life jackets that they had hoped would save their lives may have contributed to, in fact, what happened. Because as the ship sank and water poured into the main cabin where most people were sheltering, it simply forced the people wearing life jackets to float upwards. As the water poured in, the people with the life jackets were carried upwards by the buoyancy of the jackets and pinned against the ceiling of the cabin, kept them away from doors and emergency exits. And of course, it's impossible to swim against incoming gallons and gallons of fast-flowing water. Probably impossible if you're not wearing a life jacket, but certainly completely impossible if you are wearing a life jacket. So again, questions as to whether that was the right decision. Should they have not put on those life jackets? They stepped outside the cabin. They were on the open deck of the boat. You know, a little bit like an aeroplane, and they warn you when you're flying an aeroplane, and they say if there is any difficulty that involves perhaps landing on the sea, everybody's told to put on their life jackets, but not to inflate them before they leave the aircraft. That's for the same reason, so that they don't get pinned inside the aircraft cabin. Obviously, boat life jackets aren't exactly the same. They're not necessarily inflatable, and the ones that the passengers were wearing on that day were not the sort that you inflate. They were already solid, a little bit like the ones everybody is wearing on this boat today. But of course the difficulty with that is if you're not clear of the vessel, then it can, as it does to have in this instance, contribute to you being trapped inside it. So another aspect of what happened on that day that needs to be investigated. The Thai authorities, right up to the top really, right up to the Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, but also people involved with the Thai police, the Marine Division, the Immigration Department, even the Tourist Authority, everybody is promising and ensuring that there will be a completely open and transparent and detailed investigation into everything that went wrong. Perhaps not surprising, after this tragedy, which of course had a dramatic impact on people around the world, but nowhere more so than China, from where all of the victims had originated. Chinese people are the number one highest number of visitors who come to Thailand for holidays. They make up almost a third of all holiday. It's running at around about 10 million Chinese visitors who come to Thailand every year. This is a place which is accessible from Thailand. Obviously it has very good weather. It's noted for its relatively low prices still, and wide variety of food and activities. So it's an enormously popular place for Chinese to come. And tourism, of course, is also enormously important to the Thai economy. But after this happened, bookings plummeted, from Chinese holidaymakers. Bookings were cancelled, future bookings were not made. There's a wide disparity in figures between the official and the unofficial, but even the people like the Tourist Authority are saying up to 20 to 25% of fewer Chinese holidaymakers came here in the aftermath of boat tragedy. But if you talk to the people who own the hotels here and the people who own restaurants, they will tell you that the number of Chinese visitors is down by 70 to 80%. It's had a really marked impact. Now, there are accidents here from time to time. People get involved in drownings, people get involved in road accidents, and to date, that has not really had an impact on the numbers who want to come here. People have still taken the view that they will come here and they will enjoy themselves. But this particular incident, perhaps because of the horror really of what took place, the high number of fatalities, more or less put a block on Chinese people coming here. Now, something that the Thai authorities very much hope that they can reverse. I think they want to see tourists come back here. They want to see Chinese tourists come back here, and that's another reason why we've been invited to come here today. They want to show, they want people to see that everything that can be done to find out exactly what happened here and who, if anybody, was to blame. Anything that can be done is being done, and right from the beginning, I was here the day after the boat sank, and I've been here 3 or 4 times for extended periods since, seeing how this event unravels and what steps are being taken, and if people are actually keeping their promises. And there is a big focus here to try to reassure people that this isn't something that's going to be swept under the carpet. The full investigation will take place, and certainly central to that is getting this boat back above the surface. We're still waiting and we're hoping. We can certainly see that those ropes, those chains, are higher now than they were when we started bringing you these pictures some 15-20 minutes ago. The actual timetable for raising the Phoenix from the seabed and seeing her burst through the water and reappear on the surface, that timetable does keep changing. Obviously it's a difficult job. It's a much harder job than it looks. As I say, it's calm on the surface, but below the surface at this point the water is deep and the currents are strong. And of course, central to the police investigation is getting the boat up intact. They want the boat to suffer none or as little damage as possible in this retrieval operation, because once the boat is brought back to the surface, they want to be able to examine it, and if there is anything broken or anything in the wrong place or anything not as it should be, they want to be able to assure themselves that that is how it was at the time of the accident and is not further damage that has been caused in the recovery operation. And so that's another reason this is all being done so slowly as it may seem to those watching. Great care is being taken to try to not only bring the boat back to the surface, but to bring it back in as good a condition as possible. It's not too clear from here. I don't know what we can see. It almost looks as though, is that the boat now? Is that the boat coming above the water? It looks as though that might be the top superstructure of the Phoenix boat, but we're a little bit too far away. Is it any clearer through the camera? It looks as though that might be the top sides of the actual boat. I don't know, is there anybody who can tell us? Can you ask the police for us? Does that look like it's the boat itself? Is that actually the boat? Okay, so yes, that is, we are now seeing the top of the Phoenix boat break through the water. After 4 months and 12 days on the bottom of the sea, the boat is now coming back up above the surface of the water. What we can see isn't very clear, but if you look at the crane, if you look at the main chains, the 4 chains are coming down. There are 2 cross members, and then at the bottom of those chains at water level you can see what was a very brightly coloured white boat, but clearly it's been underwater for more than 4 months. But we are now seeing the Phoenix rising back above the surface of the sea. This is something that so many people have worked so hard and so long to achieve. We talked a little earlier about a Thai salvage diver who died in the attempt to bring this boat to the surface. He became the 48th victim of this terrible tragedy. 47 Chinese holidaymakers drowned when the boat sank, and then Nipat Kladnak was the 48th victim, a Thai salvage diver. The man, in fact, who had very first found the wreck of the boat on the seabed continued with operation to look for survivors, to recover the dead, to recover the possessions that were lost, and then to try to bring the boat to the surface. Then he lost In fact, that initial recovery team, who worked throughout August and September and October, 3 months, to try to bring the Phoenix back to the surface, it was simply technically too difficult. They had a plan to attach numerous tanks and balloons by ropes to the boat, pump them full of air, and then use the buoyancy to float the Phoenix to the surface. But with all the sand and the debris and the water on board the Phoenix boat, every time they attempted it, the ropes simply broke, or the balloons burst, or the air spilled out, and eventually after 3 months they had to go to the Thai authorities and say that they had exhausted all of their capabilities and they simply weren't able to achieve what was required. So they then had to take a step back, and it was at that point that this recovery team was contracted. And this is a specialist crane ship and platform which has been brought here to southern Thailand. It's been sailed here from the port of Singapore up the Malacca Strait, and it arrived here just a few days ago. In the interim, while it was making its way here, new specialist divers from this company arrived in advance, and they began preparations for the arrival of this ship. And in the few days since this much bigger, much more sophisticated crane ship has been here, excuse me, great progress has been made, resulting, as we can now see, admittedly not too clearly, but we can see that the top sides of the Phoenix are now above water. As you can see, everything is being done in a measured and a careful, controlled way. But this is a huge breakthrough. This is exactly what everyone who's been involved in this operation from the start has been hoping for and waiting for. Clearly, it's also something that is being watched with concern, but also with interest, particularly in China, particularly with the relatives of those who lost their lives in this vessel. It's the first view they've had of this vessel since their loved ones died within it. And that's not an easy thing for anyone to think about or to look at. But it is being seen as essential. The learning process, clearly whenever there is a disaster of this kind, whether it's on land, at sea or in the air, the first concern, of course, is for the survivors and the victims and for the families and for the arrangements that have to be made. But once that process has been completed, what is then essential for the whole of society, for all of us, is that a full investigation is made to try to find out how that terrible accident happened in the first place. Excuse me. Already improvements have been made. After the accident, after the sinking of the Phoenix on the 5th of July earlier this year, the authorities here ordered inspections of all the tourist boats based here in Phuket. Phuket, of course, is a huge holiday destination. Certainly one of the #1 destinations for people from China, along with Chiang Mai in the north, but in the south for a beach destination, Phuket is very popular. And one of the biggest attractions of Phuket is the sea surrounding it. It's a little bit grey and it's a little bit rainy today, but on a clear day, this is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. There are a number of small islands with golden sandy beaches, and travelling out to those small islands is very much a very regular thing to do when you come to this part of Thailand, and a number of boats were operating. Now, it was found that as many as 400 boats were involved in one way or another with the holiday trade. They were all inspected. In fact, minor defects were found, half of them, and all were made that they had to be rectified immediately. 30 boats were actually found to be unsafe and ordered out of the water, and improvements had been made and those concerns had been addressed. So this was a very important step. Has resulted very quickly from this particular accident. So already it's fair to say that people who come here on holiday and take boats and go out in boats on the sea here in islands, they're already safer than they were before. So although it's a thing that has happened here, there are positives to be drawn from it, and certainly it's hoped that more can be learned when the Phoenix is fully out of the water and to be investigated. I'm going to decide, because I think clearly you want to see what's happening. Now what we know the plan is, we don't know the exact timetable, but this was the most important thing. That boat was lying in 45 meters of water. What's that, 160, 170 feet? That's very, very deep. It's been a very, very difficult operation, technically very dangerous operation. We said that one initial Thai salvage divers lost his life. In fact, another 3 divers had to be taken to hospital at various points because they simply stayed down too long and they suffered decompression sickness, often referred to as the bends. So they had to be brought carefully back to the surface, taken to the mainland, taken to Phuket Island, taken to hospital and put inside decompression chambers. One of those divers had to remain in hospital for a whole month to recover from the injuries that he sustained. The other 2 had to spend 2 weeks each in hospital. So that was a serious situation. This has been an extremely difficult job, but this is what everybody was working towards. The top side of the Phoenix has now breached the water and is visible on the surface. Now the plan in the coming days, I'm not sure how quickly it can be done, whether it can be done today or tomorrow or it'll take longer, but once the Phoenix is entirely above the water, the whole boat is back above the water, whether it's able to be refloated, nobody knows. Maybe it will be lifted up and put on a platform. I think that actually is what is anticipated. Water will be pumped out as much as possible here at sea, but then the boat, the remains of the hull, the boat will be taken on a platform from here back to the main island of Phuket, and it will be taken along a canal to a shipyard where a dock has been prepared to receive it, and it'll be there once it's been safely taken from here at sea and actually taken back to Phuket to a shipyard which is very close to Phuket City on the island of Phuket, and there the boat will be emptied of any remaining water, debris will be cleaned away, and that is when the formal police forensic investigation will take place. They will go over the boat stem to stern, top to bottom. They'll examine the materials that the boat has been made from to ensure that they were strong enough or should have been strong enough. They will examine the design of the boat. They will double check the suspicions that have already been raised publicly by Thai officials, whether or not the boat was actually constructed in the proper way by ship builders who were properly registered. They will be checking the engine on board. We've already said there are fears that it was not a specialist marine engine built for a ship at sea or a boat at sea, but in fact it was an engine designed for a lorry or a truck on dry land. All of these things will have to be looked at. The physical evidence of the boat itself will form a huge part of the investigation which will follow. We talked a little earlier about the promises that have been made, that there will be openness and there will be transparency, and that is always something that people are concerned about. Clearly it's the Thai authorities who are driving this recovery and are carrying out the investigation. But the Chinese authorities are being kept informed at every step. And also, we now know that a German firm of engineers are acting as a third party. They're acting as independent evaluators of everything that's done. They will be examining the vessel themselves, and they will be drawing up their own report, and they will be making that report available to the Thai authorities and presumably the Chinese authorities as well. So every effort is being made to try to learn lessons from this awful disaster and not just see it as an act of God or one of those things. On the day back in July the 5th, when this happened, although the storm which was to engulf the boat and cause it to sink blew up very, very rapidly in the afternoon, literally at about the same time of day as it is now, it had been forecast. That's another part of the investigation. Ships or small boats had been warned not to go to sea. Now that morning it broke clear and fine. It was a nice morning. It was sunny. The sea was flat. But nevertheless, boat captains, we're going to step back a little bit just because there's a little bit of noise here, but boat captains had been told not, can we go a little bit back that way? Captains had been told not to go to sea. Speedboats had been told not to go to sea. And even boats of this size, of the Phoenix's size, which we believe is 29 meters in length and 2 or 3 decks above the level of the water, I don't think it was an explicit instruction, but certainly advice had been given that there was a strong possibility of storms, and boats should really not be putting out to sea on pleasure trips. Now that was something that clearly the holiday makers would not have been aware of, but the ship's crew would or should have been aware of, and that also the actions of the crew on that day were very much taken into consideration. The skipper of the boat and all the crew, all Thai, they all survived. They managed to get off the boat and they were rescued by other craft which, despite the very bad weather, despite the very rough seas and high winds, lots and lots and lots of other small craft raced to the area and in fact rescued some 60 odd people, thereabouts, 50, 60 people from the water. They literally pulled them from the water, 5 or 6 at a time, and threw them on the deck of whatever boat was the closest. And amongst them was the skipper and was the crew. But sadly, all the fatalities, almost half of the people on board the boat, and all of the fatalities were Chinese holidaymakers, and they wouldn't have been warned. They would simply have followed the instructions they were given to put on their life jackets. They had hoped, of course, those life jackets would prove instrumental in saving their lives. We now know that certainly in some cases at least, they had the opposite effect. They were instrumental in causing people to drown, and so that is something that will be looked at. There are different designs of life jackets. There are some that have to be inflated after you leave a vessel. There are some that are already inflated, which are known as buoyancy aids, and then there's the best life jackets of all, which actually have a flotation pad at the back of the neck behind the head, which even if you're unconscious, they will keep a person out of the water and will keep their head above the water. The design of the life jacket is such that even if the person is unconscious and can't make any effort to help themselves, just bear with me a second. Okay, well, can we step back a bit because they're doing a tribute, but clearly we need to carry on. No, we'll keep looking at the boat, don't worry about that. I just don't want to interrupt anybody who's doing whatever they're doing. Sorry, we're moving around a bit. We are on a boat at sea. It's relatively calm, but there is still movement. So yes, we were saying there are at least 3 different specific types of life jackets, and whether they were given the appropriate life jackets or not will be something else that is going to be investigated. So there are lots and lots of lessons to be learned from this disaster. A number of them Already investigations are taking place, and the various paper trails and licenses and registers are being checked. But yes, this is what's seen as the most important part of physical evidence, the actual wreck itself. You can perhaps see down here at the front of the vessel, there is now a short ceremony of remembrance and respect for those who lost their lives. Clearly, there are no bodies in the sea. Every body of every person who died was recovered, was brought back to land, and given the appropriate funeral service. Some bodies were cremated here in Thailand, and some were taken back to China for funeral services to take place there. So, if there's any comfort to be gained, all of the bodies of the people who perished were recovered. That in itself was not an easy operation. It took many days. Some bodies were found in the sea, very close to where this accident happened. And in fact, harking back to what we said before about life jackets, some of those people who drowned were actually found dead in the sea, wearing their life jackets, but face down in the water. And that's one of the points we were discussing a moment ago. Standard buoyancy aids, like this one, are fine if you're conscious. This will keep you afloat in the water. It won't do anything else. It won't do any more than that. But it will keep you afloat while you wait for rescue, and it does allow you to swim if you're not injured. But the downside of this type of buoyancy aid is that if you are unconscious, it doesn't stop you flopping forwards or backwards. So there are life jackets which have a big flotation pad at the back of your head, and even if you're unconscious, that will keep your head above the water. But these buoyancy aids do not. And a number of people were found drowned, still wearing buoyancy aids like this, face down in the water. So again, that's something that's going to be looked at. But yes, but all of the bodies were recovered. Some were found in the sea, where we are now, very close to the point where the Phoenix sank. It's hard to think about these things, but it's important that lessons are learned. More were actually found still trapped inside the main cabin of the boat. Mothers with their arms around their children. They died together, hugging each other. Awful, almost impossible to contemplate the horror of what they faced. But those bodies were recovered from the boat. Some had been carried by the tide. Some bodies were actually found many kilometers from here. But the search area was widened and widened and widened. Again, there was a promise made to the families right at the beginning that everybody would be found. Every single body would be recovered. Nobody would be simply left as lost and presumed dead and disappeared. Everybody was recovered. The very final body was actually found on the seabed. It was a man, and he was pinned to the bottom of the sea, actually by the boat. He was found underneath the Phoenix boat, and even after he'd been found, it was at such a deep depth, and we've talked about operating at such deep depths, 45 meters. It's incredibly difficult for independent divers to go down to that depth. It took a long time to retrieve that body and to lift the boat enough to get that body free. Nothing about this entire episode has been straightforward or simple, but that 47th and final body was retrieved some time ago. All of this happened within perhaps 2 weeks of the loss of the Phoenix on July the 5th. So since that time, the emphasis has been very much on the mechanics of how did this happen and what can be learned. And number one, central to that investigation is what we're looking at now, the actual recovery of the ship, of the vessel, of the Phoenix boat. And there it is, dirty, sort of off-white, grey-coloured now. That was a gleaming white, pristine looking vessel when it put to sea on that fateful day. But what we're looking at now is the top sides of the boat, the superstructure of the boat, and that has been lying more or less undisturbed on the bottom of the sea here for 4 months and 12 days, and clearly that's some of the effects of time and tide that have been taken on the actual boat itself. But clearly, although we're some distance away, we talked about this, we can't go closer than this really for the safety of the recovery team as much as anything else. There are a number of sea anchors which have been attached to the seabed to hold that crane ship and that recovery platform stable while it lifts the weight of the boat filled with water from the bottom of the sea. And if we go any closer, there is a possibility that we might foul one of those lines leading to an anchor, and that could cause instability of the rescue vessel or the recovery vessel itself. So we can't go any closer. So it's not easy to see detail, but we can certainly see success. What they've been trying to achieve for so long, for 3 long months, they have now finally achieved. It took 2 different recovery teams. It cost the life of one of the recovery divers. Another 3 divers were hospitalized for extended periods. A lot of time and effort has gone into this. A lot of money has been spent. I think few people envisaged at the outset just how difficult technically this operation was going to be. But finally, success has been achieved. It looks as though the boat is more or less being held in that position. It's probably already more than between 20 and 30 minutes already that the boat has been above the surface of the water. We do believe that the next step will be to completely lift it out of the sea and put it on the black barge that we can see to the right of the screen. But every stage of this operation has been done with delicacy and with care and consideration. They obviously don't want anything to go wrong now. 90% of the hard work has been done. Getting the boat up to the surface was always the biggest challenge, and now that they've achieved that, they'll be happy and they'll be relaxed that they've managed to do that. So they won't be in any great hurry now to put it onto the floating platform. Clearly they wouldn't want to undo any of the good work that they'd managed to achieve. So all of these operations take place at a measured pace, but clearly what we're looking at, not too clear, I know, but the significance is enormous. The significance of actually achieving this recovery operation after working at it for so long is a massive breakthrough, and it's certainly exactly what they were hoping for and exactly what they were waiting for. And now that the boat has actually been brought to this position, it won't be long until the next stage of the investigation can begin. As we say, that'll be getting the boat onto the platform alongside the crane ship, again at a slow and measured pace, taking it across the water to the main island of Phuket. And we're not too far off Phuket, it's only a few kilometers. The wreck of the Phoenix will be taken to Phuket Island itself, and it'll be taken to a shipyard in Phuket City where a dock has been prepared, where all of the water will be pumped out, all of the debris will be removed, and once it is safely in that position, then the detailed police investigation can take place, the forensic teams can move in, the marine engineers, the people who need to know, or the people who know about these vessels, what should be there, what shouldn't be there. They'll be checking the integrity of the boat. All of this, as we mentioned, overseen by an independent third party of German engineers. So that's about as much as we can show you for now. I think there's going to be a pause before anything further happens. But it's not a happy day. It's a very sad occasion. It's a very somber occasion. But hopefully you'll agree it's a very necessary occasion. It's been an extraordinarily hard task to get that boat back above the water. The salvage teams will be congratulating themselves on a job well done. And now, after a short pause, the next stage, learning the lessons of this terrible tragedy, can begin. For now, we're going to leave it there. If there are any significant developments, we'll bring them to you in the coming days. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found this instructive, if perhaps not too much of a happy occasion. Thanks very much, and join us again on CGTN. But for now, that's all from here at Phuket in Thailand.